Hello, today we are going to discuss the module for Principles of Information Security, and in that second part, which is worm, I have already uploaded the first part, which is about virus. What is a worm? A worm, in this module we are discussing about various malwares and have already discussed about virus, and the second one is worm. Worm is also a type of malware. So what are the peculiarity of worm? What are the features of worm? How can a worm is spread? How can you detect worm, etc. We are going to discuss in this video. First of all, what is a worm? It is a program that can run independently and can propagate its version to other computers through the network. That is, it is a program that can propagate through the network and it can replicate itself. It can move from one computer to other computer through networks and perform unwanted actions. And it can do all these things without the help of users. That is, it do not need a host for support. And it also consumes a high amount of bandwidth. The self-replication of the worm can be done by two ways. Either you can use emails. Emails can be used to send copies of the worm to other system, or it can do remote execution, like it can execute a copy in the remote system. So in these both ways it can spread through the network. There are there are five categories of worms: internet scanning worms, email worms, P2P worms, web worms, and mobile worms. Actually, in this module itself, we will be discussing each one of this, and let me just introduce each one. And the first one is internet scanning worm. What it do is, such type of worm scan all available network resources for vulnerable machines. What do you mean by vulnerable machines? Vulnerable machines are the weak machines, like for example, a machine with a buffer overflow vulnerability. So it scans for the available network for such machines, weak machines, and then finds a way to spread through it. Such a type of worm is called internet scanning worm. Then we have another category of worms which you can call topological worms. Topological worms, the two types are email worms and P2P worms, in which email worm is the one which is a common type of worm where it can spread through the email. Initially it will reach the email of an infected machine. Then what it do is, it will search the mailbox, it will search all the other email address present in the mailbox of this machine, and then finds a way to spread through all those emails. And third type is P2P worm. P2P worm occur in the type of a peer-to-peer network. In such a network, there will be a shared folder. So what the worm do is, it will place a copy in any of the shared folder and spread through the whole peer-to-peer network. It keeps a copy in the shared folder and spread through whole peer-to-peer network, which type you can call it as P2P worms. And the type is web worms. Actually, web worms execute in browsers. It's like a XSS worm. We have already discussed in third module about the XSS vulnerability. So in that case, he can exploit XSS vulnerability in web servers. So web worms are those worms that execute in browsers. And the last type is mobile worms. As you know, mobile worms can easily spread, can exploit the whole APIs that we use in mobile systems. So it's very easy for the worms to spread through the mobile. So these are the different types of worms. And what are the adverse effects of worms? Adverse effects of worms include network congestion. It may result in the congestion in the traffic of network. Then consume bandwidth. Yes, worms consume a high amount of bandwidth. Then it can produce a number of error messages. It can result in system restart, malfunctioning, etc. All these are adverse effects of worms. And now let us see what are the differences between virus and worms. Virus we have already discussed in the first video. And when you compare the working of virus and worm, there are various differences. I will just name it once and then I will discuss it in detail. First of all, a virus can attach itself to an operating system or a program. That is, virus needs a program to be attached to it. What in the case of worm? Worms do not attach itself to the operating system or program. That is, virus needs user data for propagation, whereas worms self-propagate. Both will replicate. Virus will also replicate, worms will also replicate, but virus needs a user data for its replication, but worms will self-replication. Then virus damages local machines. It is affected in that host machine, but what about worms? Worms will affect the whole network. Virus spreads slowly, whereas worms spread rapidly. Now, the difference between virus and worms, we will discuss it in detail. The all 4 points are discussed once more here. You can read it clearly in this slide. A computer virus attaches itself to a program, that is, it attaches to a program in the or file in the host, whereas worm is considered to be a subclass of virus, and worm spread from one computer to other computer. A virus requires the help of a user, a host user. But what about worm? Worm consumes too much system memory, network bandwidth, causing web servers, network servers, etc. to stop responding. And when you consider the criteria of virus and worm, a virus has got two criteria. It must execute itself and it must replicate itself. What about worm? Worm searches for a network which is vulnerable, which is weak, so that it can spread easily through it. Then what about speed of a virus and worm? Speed of virus is very slow. It is slow, but what about worm? It is fast. And there are some examples. I have noted it. You can read it later. Now, operations of a worm. As we have discussed the case in virus, it has got 4 stages: a dormant phase, a propagation phase, a triggering phase, and an execution phase, as in the case of virus. So what is a dormant phase? The worm will be idle. It will be waiting for an event to occur. The event can be a program, it can be a time, it can be a date, etc. Then next phase is propagation phase. So in that phase, worm searches for other systems so that it can make send copies to it and run. And then third phase is triggering phase. Worm will be activated by the trigger event. And then the last one is execution phase, where it will start functioning. A DDoS attack on a specified target is example of such a operation. And what about the method of operation? Actually, initially what happens is it will be present in the infected host and it will be searching for the target. When the target is acquired, target means it searches for, I said it searches for a vulnerable network, it searches for vulnerable machines in the network, etc. So in that way it obtains a target initially. And when the target is obtained, what it will do? It will deliver the malicious code to the target. It will deliver the malicious code to the target. Then the malicious code is present in the target and starts to execute the malicious code in the target machine, so that the system is compromised now. And then transfer the additional code, and when propagation is complete. Now from the last stage it will again goes to the first stage. It will search for another target. Then once the target machine is found, then the malicious code is transferred, and the malicious code is present in the target machine. It starts to execute it and then propagate from there onwards. In that way the worm spreads very rapidly. And next is various worm research motivation, which includes various initial worms that were formed, like code red, which was affected about 3,60,000 in 14 hours. Slammer 75,000 were affected. Blaster, 1,50,000 were affected, etc. A witty worm, a sasser worm, etc. And I have also included a detail of all these types of worms. You can go through it later, or in the text it is given clearly. You can go through it or using internet. Then what about the worm characteristics? Worm characteristics are of 4 types: enhanced targeting, enhanced speed, enhanced capabilities, and enhanced destructive power. So we'll discuss each one of it. The first one is enhanced targeting. Actually, the main attribute of a worm is that it spreads its infection to other computers. That's the most dangerous part of a worm. So how is the worm selecting its target? There are various ways for a worm to select its target, and these ways are: either can spread worms through email. That I have already told you how it spread through email. It is the most easiest for a worm to find a target. Initially, it will be present in an infected host. Then what it will do? It will check the mailbox of that machine and find other targets from the address book and spreads through those addresses. It's very easy for the worm to spread through email. Then the second one is it uses search engines to collect URLs. So what it do is it uses various search engines to collect URLs, and these URLs are of potentially vulnerable targets. So always it checks for a weakness. It can be in the network, it can be in the machine. Everywhere it checks for a weakness, vulnerable machines. So here also it checks for vulnerable targets, URLs of vulnerable targets. Then obtain phone numbers for victim phone. It is very easy to find the victim's phone numbers. Then obtain email ID from victim's mail. Also scan IP address space for vulnerable machines. This is a type of internet scanning worm. Internet scanning worms do this what scans IP address space for the vulnerable machines. Actually, in this way, there are main 2 worms working: Codred version 1 and Codred version 2. These are very famous worms. You can check it in web. Okay, Codred version 1. It used a random scanning method, that is choosing IP address in a random method. And what Codred version 2 done, it has done a localized scanning method, like it attempt to connect with network address of same network. So these were the 2 main types of worms: Codred version 1 and Codred version 2. Now the next one is enhanced speed method. So enhanced speed methods means worm has got a very high speed for its replication. So what it do is it can spawn multiple threads. It can give generation to multiple threads to enhance infection. What it do is thread can set up connect with a subset of hosts, then increase the rate of spreading. What it do is it set up connection with a subset of hosts and thus increases the rate of spreading. So in that way it gives generation for many number of threads. Then vulnerability happens to UDP than TCP. This is because in the case of UDP, when you compare UDP and TCP, UDP is UDP is connectionless, so it requires no time for connection with the victim. It's easy for such a victim to be connected to virus. Then another important part is buffer overflow vulnerability occurs mainly on UDP when you compare it with a TCP. That is, buffer overflow type vulnerabilities occurs mainly in the case of UDP. So for the case of a worm, it's easy to be attached to a UDP connected machine than a TCP one. I think it's clear for you. Then the third case is attacker can create a hit list of victims which is shared between worms. Actually, what do you mean by this hit list? A hit list include address of thousands of vulnerable machines. Always attacker will have a hit list. Hit list include thousands of address of thousands of vulnerable machines, and this hit list will be shared between worms. which make easy for the worm to spread. So these are the various ways by which the worm increase its speed of spreading. And the third one is enhanced capability. Enhanced capability here discusses its various features, like worms have got a unique and distinct signature that can be used to detect worm. Actually, what do you mean by signature? Signature is pattern of bit indicating a worm. It is the key to detect them. So it is the signature means pattern of the worm, pattern of bit indicating the worm. It is a key way to detect the worms. But in order to escape from this, what worms will do is, worms use encryption for disguising the worm code. They will use a encryption method. So whenever they use an encryption method, encrypted worms should be decrypted before execution. So sometimes this decrypting feature can be used to detect them. That's a method of detecting them. And then, in order to escape from such detection, there are various methods used by worms. There are various capabilities for worms. And these are the capabilities like polymorphic worms, metamorphic worms, time-aware worms, etc. We will see one by one. So first one is polymorphic worm. Different instances of the worm may use different key for encryption. Already we have discussed polymorphic virus. So you will be knowing what is polymorphic worm. A worm which changes its phase each time, which you can call it as a polymorphic worm. Different instances of the worm may use different key for encryption. Here it uses different instances of the worm uses different key for encryption and thus find it difficult for the detection. Then second type is metamorphic worm. Worms that have multiple versions without relying on encryption as different worm code version. Here what it is, it uses different worm code version and such worms are called metamorphic worms. Then third type is a time aware worm. What it do it is it will obtain the date and time from network time protocol server, that is NTP, and can initiate specific actions at specific point of time. For example, a DOS attack occurs in such a way. What it will do is it will obtain the date and time from an NTP server and perform the specific action at the specific time as provided by the NTP. And there are other type of worms can update themselves by downloading code from given URL. That is another type. So these are the capabilities of the worms. And the last feature is enhanced destructive power. The destructive power of worm is also very high. Worm causes billions of dollars damage. So how is the damage occurred? The cause can be estimated by lost productivity, cleanup costs, system downtime, etc., which all these affects business and revenues. So it affects in a large way the destructive power of worm. Worm causes all the adverse effects of worms are worm causes network congestion problem. Then it can disrupt the normal internet traffic and increase system downtime in that way. Then various DDoS attacks, website defacement, and also there are some worm like witty worm which delete some part of hard disk and lead to system crash. There are various types of worm and each type of worm has resulted in different type of destructions. And some worms steal sensitive personal and corporate information which could remain undetected. So these are the various destructive powers of worms. What are the solutions for worms? You can use an antivirus. You can avoid using illegal softwares. Use only legal softwares. And don't open suspicious mails. These are the simple ways by which you can avoid worms. Thank you.